when it comes to nutrition, so much of the message about food is negative. It's fear, shame, guilt. Don't do this. Don't eat that. You're a bad person if you do this. You're going to look terrible if you do that. This is going to kill you. And even to this day, a lot of the messaging out there from influencers on social media is like this ultra processed food, this and brand assassination, going to the grocery store with a camera and holding up a bag of something and pointing out how bad it could be for you. I've sort of flipped the script on that. What I say is that let's learn about what's good for us that also tastes delicious, that we love.
This is the Visible Voices podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Resa E. Lewis. In today's conversation, I am so glad to be bringing you my tete-a-tete with Dr. William W. Li. Will is an internal medicine physician, translational research scientist, speaker, entrepreneur, social media educator, and more. In 2010, he delivered a wildly famous TED Talk entitled, "Can We Eat to Starve Cancer?" He's the author of the 2019 Eat to Beat Disease, the new science of how your body can heal itself, and the 2023 Eat to Beat Your Diet, burn fat, heal your metabolism, and live longer. Audience, I'd like to walk you through some of the science. The common denominator here for many diseases, and particularly many cancers, is abnormal angiogenesis. Angiogenesis itself is the process of new blood vessels forming from existing blood vessels. It can certainly be a normal process that helps with, for example, wound healing and supplying oxygen to tissues and to organs. However, remember, we're talking about abnormal angiogenesis. What Will studies, writes, and speaks on is what we can do to starve cancer, what we can eat, and how we can create an environment that is anti-angiogenic. Let's get to the conversation. So in today's discussion, conversation, chat, tete-a-tete, I want to get practical and help our audience have some short bursts of thought around some certain specific foods and beverages. For example, I start every morning with black coffee. What are your thoughts on the health, the anti-angiogenic aspects of coffee?
Before I dive into the food or foods, let me just say that the opportunity to use food for health is thousands of years old. And a lot of times we think about it as a modern trend, but you got to think about this, Resa, before the pharmaceutical revolution in the 1940s, we didn't have any drugs. So the only thing we had was food, diet, and lifestyle for healing, maybe some herbs and some other surgery, of course. And one of the wonderful things that I think we finally come to is recognizing that food indeed is where we start. We have extraordinary science that can be used to study food. So, for example, you ask about coffee.
Yeah.
Well, listen, coffee is a pick-me-up. We all know it has caffeine in it. I drank plenty of coffee in med school and during residency just to kind of stay alert and awake. We know that pilots will use caffeine, and military people use caffeine to kind of stay ergogenic and focused on things, for high performance. But actually, we're missing the forest for the trees, because coffee, from the coffee bean, also has one of the many bioactives that are in food. So for coffee, it's called chlorogenic acid. It's anti-inflammatory. It actually turns on our brown fat to ratchet up our metabolism, to burn down harmful inflammatory visceral fat. It's also anti-angiogenic, meaning it helps our body defend itself against tumor blood vessels by cutting off extra blood vessels that might be feeding cancer. And coffee indeed has been shown to decrease the risk in association studies of dementia, certain types of cancer, and other chronic illnesses that we all fear.
We know that vaccinations do not cause autism spectrum disorder. You have given a very cohesive, cogent explanation on how we know that soy products do not cause breast cancer. Can you go into that for us?
When it comes to soy and other foods, soy and breast cancer, tomato and lectins and nightshades and eggplants, there's a whole litany of urban legends that, I love to take out Thor's hammer and bash them. And you never have a problem doing this. But let me tell you, most of these false facts that float out on the internet, and even among the medical community, I have to say, after all, we as doctors are also just information consumers, and it's impossible for us to stay on top of everything. And because we're not trained in nutrition, for the most part, we are as vulnerable to misinformation when it comes to food as anyone else. Let's spell out the soy as an example. Somebody who was well-intentioned and thinking realized that human cancers like breast cancers can be responsive to hormones like estrogen. And in fact, some human breast cancers are estrogen sensitive, as we all know. And this well-intentioned individual also heard that soybeans also contain plant-based substances that are called phytoestrogens. Well, phytoestrogen, phyto meaning plant, if you don't really think about it, it's got estrogens in both sides of the equation. So therefore, if human breast cancers, some of them might be sensitive to estrogen, well, then women should definitely stay away from soy because it's got a estrogen as well. And this is where I like to assign the good intention of somebody who's not a scientist. So they naturally put these things together, had a bully pulpit of some sort, spread the word, and just like telephone, everything kind of, that old game that we used to play when we were kids, the more you repeat, the more embellishment actually comes to it until, even in the medical community, I remember when I was, even during residency training, I'd hear certain physicians tell women, like, is there anything I shouldn't eat? Yeah, never eat soy because it's dangerous for breast cancer. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'm a scientist. I'm a vascular biologist. So I look at facts. Human estrogen, if you put it up on a screen, looks like a certain chemical structure. You put up a plant estrogen, a phytoestrogen, it looks nothing like it, does not resemble the human estrogen at all. Now we know the structure of the molecule has everything to do with the function of the molecule. And because the plant estrogen in soy doesn't look like the human estrogen, in fact, it doesn't trigger the hormonal response. In fact, what plant estrogens, phytoestrogens from soy specifically does is it blocks the human estrogen receptor, thereby serving really as Mother Nature's tamoxifen, because we write prescriptions for a drug to block human estrogen receptors every single day to treat breast cancers. Okay, so not only did I just tell you that the chemistry tells us that soy isn't harmful, this has been proven time and time and again in the laboratory. Well, a study of more than 5,000 women, it's called the Shanghai Women's Breast Cancer Study, published in JAMA, right? So a credible journal, looked at the women at the highest risk of breast cancer. These are women who already had breast cancer, and looked at the correlation of outcome. Did they do well or don't do well if they ate soy, and based on how much soy they ate. And it turns out that in this 5,000 women study who already had breast cancer, those women who ate the most soy, highest soy consumption, most phytoestrogen, had a 30% lower risk of mortality from breast cancer. And if they already had surgery or if they were in remission, the more soy they ate, the lower the chances of breast cancer recurrence, blocking the estrogen receptor. Now, there's one additional thing, and this is where my research comes into play. You take the soy phytoestrogen, it's got a name, it's called genistein, but we've studied genistein in the lab and found that genistein from soybeans powerfully cuts off the blood supply to tumors. So it starves cancer, breast cancer, and other cancers by cutting off the blood supply. And I think this is really where we need to be, where we're setting out to go when it comes to food as medicine, especially for us in the medical community, because we are uniquely capable, trained to be able to take lots of different types of data, integrate them into a coherent story, and then convert that into a message that we would tell a patient, a family member, a colleague, and of course ourselves.
Thank you for walking us through that. And I want to pull out a nugget, which may or may not be surprising to audience members. We in medical school, in residency training, hardly ever get training, education, learning on nutrition, on food. And it is so surprising to people. And I will share that when I finished medical school, my summary of everything we learned, because we learn a lot about pathology, what goes wrong. We don't learn. Our U.S. healthcare system is not based on health and prevention. It's about treatment once you're already sick. I distilled from everything I learned about medical school that if I could never become a nicotine cigarette smoker, and if I could prevent myself from becoming high BMI, very, very obese, then I may still get diseases and develop pathological processes, but I would not contribute to developing essentially every disease process I learned about in medical school.
And when it comes to nutrition, so much of the message about food is negative. It's fear, shame, guilt. Don't do this. Don't eat that. You're a bad person if you do this. You're going to look terrible if you do that. This is going to kill you. And even to this day, a lot of the messaging out there from influencers on social media is like, this ultra processed food, this and brand assassination, going to the grocery store with a camera and holding up a bag of something and pointing out how bad it could be for you. I've sort of flipped the script on that. What I say is that let's learn about what's good for us that also tastes delicious, that we love.
I am 100% on the same page about the health of foods and how they can actually contribute to being healthy. So I'm going to sprinkle in another one. You're feeling about eggs.
Okay. Eggs have a bad rap. My mom used to serve me eggs for breakfast when I was growing up every single day. And then some article came out in a newspaper that said that eggs are full of cholesterol and it's dangerous for you and it causes heart disease. And then the American Heart Association took off on that and it was presented at all the medical meetings. And in fact, when I was in medical school, there was still this lingering feeling that eggs were probably not the right thing for a health-oriented person to be eating. Well, it turns out nothing could be further from the truth. A high quality egg, that is an egg laid by a hen that is healthy, right? We know that when moms have babies and the moms aren't healthy, the babies are less likely to be healthy. Same deal as a chicken, right? High quality eggs are orange or even red, red orange. And that's because a normal, well-fed mommy hen will eat carotenoids, will eat natural plant-based sources of omega-3s. And the egg that's laid is filled with micronutrients. So, number one, we now know that high quality eggs versus factory raised eggs actually have more micronutrients that are beneficial. Think carotenoids like lutein and zeaxanthin that actually can lower the risk of macular degeneration, a common cause of vision loss. There are also powerful antioxidants. Back in the 70s, everything was the same. Cholesterol was the other C word, right? Besides cancer. I mean, now we know that the type of cholesterol is what matters. There's this intense interest in longevity, which is not new, but now there's money, venture capital thrown behind longevity and people who are billionaires doing really extreme types of things. But I can tell you that because aging research, geroscience is now really being actively pursued and funded, we now know that egg consumption is correlated with better brain health as we age and lower risk of dementia as well. So again, I think this is a little bit of the story of medicine, Resa, which is that, we all make assumptions, but if you're a really, really good health professional and you have a science orientation and you want to stay on top of things, what we got to do is follow the data. And sometimes the path changes from where we thought they would lead. It takes another turn into another direction. And that's also the nature of science. What we once thought isn't always true. We got to follow where the real data takes us.
Speaking of data, I'm wondering if you can share something that your foundation, your lab has recently come out with that maybe it's in process, in progress, vis-a-vis food and starving cancer.
Well, okay. My organization, the Angiogenesis Foundation, is a nonprofit, and we have lots of collaborations that we've done over 30 years. A recent study that we've done that's really amazing is finding out that oats, which are a component of skin creams, like Aveeno skin cream is made with oats, also part of breakfast, oatmeal, actually has unsung properties that we are now discovering in the lab. Oats have at least two bioactives that are being studied. We're looking at them. One is called Avananthramide, AVE. In fact, that's the kind of Latin name for oats itself, Aveeno sativa. And then beta-D-glucan, which is another bioactive. Guess what? It's a soluble fiber. Now, if you were to just take a quick look on Wikipedia of Avananthramide and beta-glucan, search them separately, you'd find that beta-glucan is a soluble fiber that feeds the gut microbiome, which we know is very, very important. And it's anti-inflammatory as well and pro-immunity. So here is this sort of unsung benefit from oats. Now, I'll tell you something that we published only recently. I can't tell you anything we've embargoed, but I'll tell you something that most people won't know about. We took the Avananthramide from pure oats and we studied it in a wound healing model. I know you're asking about cancer. I'm going to give you the other side of things for a second. But we found that if you actually inject Avananthramide to the corner of the wound, you can double the rate of wound healing, acute wound healing. Number two, and this was the surprise, the healing had better blood flow, so more beneficial angiogenesis. Third, that the healing, when you cut out the wound and looked at it under the microscope, was scarless, amazing. And then fourth, when you looked into the tissue under the microscope, using, many of the technologies that are available as for staining and actually recruit stem cells that come from the bone marrow. So again, there's food as medicine for prevention, food and medicine, what you can eat to make the treatments that we prescribe work better. And then food is medicine. We've taken a look at sort of the whole spectrum. And I think that that's a new frontier for food and health research, is to be able to discover new things inside the food and apply them in ways that maybe we hadn't thought about before.
You started, as I did, with being quite academic, publishing in academic medical scientific journal outlets, and you still do, as do I. And you have published in the non-academic, more mainstream medium outlets, and in doing so have gotten your information, your messages to a greater number of people, a broader, wider audience. Can you speak a little bit personally into what you've seen as the positive of publishing in non-academic outlets?
I think that as a medical professional, we don't get enough training on how to take these complex concepts and explain them to people who aren't really schooled to understand the techno speak that we have to learn. I was lucky early on in my education. I think I want to say I was during my gap year in medical school. I took 2 gap years between my 3rd and 4th year of medical school. Back then, it was kind of heresy to actually do that. People felt like, you're throwing away all your education. Why would you want to do that? Maybe you'll never come back. And I'm like, no, you got to trust me on this. There's more to be learned off the treadmill that I could take back on the treadmill and use that to my advantage. But unlike gap year, so a friend of mine was interested in health broadcast journalism, and ABC had a program. It was like a whole weekend, and I registered for it really to follow my friend because I was so curious about what she was interested in. And I got swept into the real media world of training for health. And I realized, wow, these reporters that you see on air on TV, they are given a story about a flu outbreak or something, like literally 20 minutes before they got to go on air to talk about it. It's at 4:30 in the morning. They got to go on to 6 o'clock news or whatever it was back then. And they had to prepare, do all their research and figure out, how do you translate all of that into a meaningful message? I don't want to use the word soundbite, but they had to be clear, succinct, and accurate and practical as well. I fell in love with that. So for me, translating things to the public became kind of a passion of mine. And I did not want to write a book for the public, honestly, because I was so busy doing my work for cancer research and do wound healing research. And I was like up to my gills with my day job at the Angiogenesis Foundation. A friend of mine from grade school, I reconnected with, and I said, what are you doing these days? And she said, oh, I'm an author coach. I help first-time authors get their feet on the ground and find out how to slingshot into the published author world. If I told you that cooked tomatoes, 2 to 3 servings a week, which each serving being only half a cup of tomato sauce, could lower the risk of prostate cancer by 29%, you could take that to the bank or take that to the grocery store and back to your kitchen. And so I realized, her name is Robin Colucci. And I said, Robin, you are so right. This is something that I feel really passionate about, is giving people the skills to heal themselves. We can empower them to do better for themselves. That's actually the ultimate ripple effect that we can have.
Yeah, we have more agency than we realize, whether it's to write, to speak, and to make the food that we eat healthier. Will, when did you realize you had a voice? When did you start using your voice?
Anecdote here. I remember probably the first time that I felt the power of my own voice was when I was in high school. Some friends convinced me to run for the high school student council president. And I was on stage saying the things that I believed in, and I got elected. But I would say fast forward when it comes to science and medicine, when I was training with Dr. Judah Folkman, Dr. Folkman was the kind of mentor that if you were on a student on a project that he was overseeing and you were doing the work and the results were significant enough where we would present it or publish it, he would let us be the first author of a paper or the first author in an abstract. And then if we got to present it, he would actually train us to go on stage for him. He would have been a logical person. And then, here was a medical student, skinny medical student in a suit. We were still trying to figure out how to dress the right way in front of all these professional experts talking about the research. And I realized that, you know what? Wow. Even as a med student, I could articulate something I was doing to experts and get them to nod their head, clap, stand up and cheer and endorse and stimulate them to do even more work based on what I was doing. And so I think maybe, those early experiences were really formative for me. Writing a book, it's a thankless task to crank out the text on a laptop. But I can tell you that once the book comes out, suddenly there's sort of like a renewed opportunity to say it all over again, but this time not on a keyboard, this time to the interviewer, the podcast host, the media, at the book signing, to somebody that you're trying to explain what you have written about to. And I found that late career experience to be thrilling and reinvigorating all over again.
A final question I have for you, because you brought up oatmeal, wounds, and wound healing. When I worked in the emergency department in New York City, particularly New York City, kitchen workers would come in having cut themselves. So a laceration of their hand, of their leg, of their arm. They often arrived with the bleeding having stopped because they put on coffee powder. Have you seen any or done any work on coffee as wound healing, as a bleeding control measure?
This is the first time I've heard of it because I haven't taken care of people in New York City, restaurant workers who cut themselves. But it sounds pretty clever to me to actually use what's at hand, a kind of resourcefulness to actually stop bleeding. I mean, obviously, ground coffee is absorbent. So it's a good way to pack a bleeding wound, or maybe not pack the wound, but kind of cover the wound to be able to absorb some of the blood. And no doubt the blood elements that come out into the coffee will coagulate. So you'd form your little fibrin clot, and so coffee grounds become kind of like an extension of your tissue. And probably that would just tamponade the bleeding. But you're asking a question to a scientist who now you've got my gears turning in my head, wondering, well, are there any bioactives that could actually help him? But food is medicine. So maybe we should be looking in coffee grounds, and maybe this New York City hospitality service habit actually could be the spark of some new research that could lead to a new discovery. I love it.
The Resa wrap-up. Special thanks to Dr. Will Lee for joining me in conversation. Lots and lots to think about and discuss. So some takeaways for you, audience. First of all, I think you get it now. Food is powerful. It's a tool to prevent disease, treat disease, and even reverse disease. Next, angiogenesis. It's a key factor in cancer development. So foods that are anti-angiogenic can help prevent, treat, even reverse the progression of cancer. Next, soy does not cause breast cancer, and it can actually help. And finally, coffee. Black coffee is a go-to for me in the morning. It has unexpected healing properties. It is anti-inflammatory. It definitely helps with productivity. And as Will shared, it can even help prevent cancer. That's all I have for you this week, audience. See you next time. The Visible Voices podcast amplifies voices in the healthcare, equity, and current trends spaces. We are a production of the People's Media Network. Our team includes Dr. Giuliano DePortu and me, Dr. Resa E. Lewis. Please find me through my website and on social media, Resa E. Lewis, MD, or through the podcast, thevisiblevoicespodcast.com. Please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, please be sure to share the show with a friend. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the institution with which they are affiliated or identified. Information herein should never be used as a substitute for clinical judgment or for medical advice.